Welcome back to the Lydia McGirt channel. I'm going to be starting to title a series with the video that I'm giving today. I'm going to call it something like Development Theories of the Gospels Are All Bunk. So this is going to go over several theories of supposed gospel development over time and argue that they just do not hold up to scrutiny and that they are based on cherry-picked data. I began with that a little bit last time, talking about the incident of Jesus being rejected at Nazareth and Matthew saying that Jesus did not heal many people, whereas Mark says that he could not. The supposed redaction by Matthew. And I discussed how that does not hold up, this notion of Matthew redacting in the service of a higher Christology. So today I'm going to be discussing Jesus' Passion. And I'm going to talk about cherry-picking Jesus' Passion to create an appearance, an artificial appearance of development. So I'm going to start by stating one of these development theories concerning Jesus' Passion. And I'm going to be borrowing here from Bart Ehrman. But unfortunately, he's not the only one who has accepted some idea of this development in Jesus' Passion. So the idea is that there's this development in Jesus' Passion from more suffering to less suffering, from Jesus not being in control, his being more or less a helpless victim of other people who are tormenting him and killing him in Mark, and his being more in control of his own death, ultimately in John, but gradually as we go on. What you'll often find in these theories is that either Matthew will be grouped with Mark, or Matthew will be grouped with Luke. And this is probably partly because the exact order of Matthew versus Luke is not a matter of very strong scholarly consensus in the mainstream world. But definitely big consensus, Mark is first, then in some order or other, Matthew and Luke, and of course John is last. And I don't even necessarily disagree with that order, though I would not put John very late. I'm even open to John being before 70, though I tend to think that it was in his old age. Be that as it may, here goes with a development theory of the Passion. In Mark, Jesus is silent throughout his crucifixion as if in shock. The only thing he utters is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Mark's account is very stark. Jesus is forsaken by everybody, and he doesn't know why he has to die. He is so much more noble in Luke. He forgives the thief on the cross. He says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." So he's much more calm and in control in Luke. And then ultimately in John, Jesus' crucifixion, and this is actually from Ehrman, is not actually agonizing for him. And in John, we find that everything is according to plan. He predicts that Judas Iscariot will betray him. He even says in John 10:18, as part of the Good Shepherd discourse, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down voluntarily. I have authority to lay it down and to take it up from my Father." And then he cries triumphantly in John 19, verse 30, "It is finished." So he's the victor there in John. And so we can see this gradual progression of more and more nobility, more and more control, less and less of a victim, etc., as we go through the Gospels. Okay, there's the theory. Now let's discuss how cherry-picked this is. I'm probably not even going to remember everything. I started out making notes, and I like filled a whole page, and then I went over on the other side, so I may not even hit everything. I'm going to try to link in the description, and feel free to message me and remind me if I forget to do this. Some good blog posts by Jonathan McClatchy and Eric Manning Testify, where they discuss some of this. I think I'm going to have a few more points than they do, but we're all making the same point that this is very, very cherry-picked. So let's start with some commonalities between the Gospels, which Ehrman is suppressing and others who are on this bandwagon are just not noticing or whatever. First of all, the flogging, abuse, and mockery of Jesus and his suffering are present in all 4 of the Gospels. There's even a unique instance of Jesus being mocked and mistreated in Luke. So Luke is the very Gospel that Ehrman emphasizes, how noble and in control Jesus is. Well, Luke 22, 6 through 12 has a unique account. It's not in any of the other Gospels, of Pilate sending him off to Herod for kind of a political reason, and Herod's men-at-arms mock him. Bullies are going to be bullies the world over. And then Herod sends him back to Pilate. So Jesus is being kicked around from Pilate to Herod, Herod to Pilate, and it even says that they're friends after that day. So it's like this political gesture. Very, very painful and ironic to you if you are a believer, or even if you just think of Jesus as an innocent man being used in this way as a political pawn and being mocked. That's unique to Luke. And just his suffering on the cross it's there, all the way through. His asking that the cup may pass from him, it's in all the synoptic Gospels. Now, Ehrman discusses a lot this unique thing that if it's anywhere, it's in Luke, about him sweating drops of blood, and there are textual questions about that, actually independent textual questions about that, so obviously that wouldn't fit with Ehrman's, noble Jesus in Luke claim. But we don't even need that. Just back up a verse in Luke. He's praying that the cup may pass from him, and then saying that, it may not, right? He realizes that it may not. And this is the same in Mark and in Matthew. I'm not saying that these are all independent accounts. It's not my point here. I'm fine with acknowledging some type of synoptic literary dependence in these places, but my point is that Luke does not, edit that out. Okay? His pleading that the cup may pass, it's right there. So if we're going to try to say that there's this redactive agenda, I guess Luke missed one, right? My God, why have you forsaken me is in both Mark and Matthew. So it's not just in Mark. It's also in Matthew. But you can't just say, okay, then we're going to categorize Matthew with Mark, where Jesus is just a helpless victim and he's not in control and blah, blah, blah. Because when they come to arrest Jesus in the garden, okay, in Matthew, and this is unique, and one of the disciples, takes out a sword and attacks one of the people who are arresting him, and Jesus tells him to stop. And then he says, don't you think that if I asked my Father, don't you realize he would give me 12 legions of angels, but the scripture must be fulfilled. So you can't assimilate Matthew to either alleged pattern. Okay, so, on the, painful, suffering, victim, less controlled, supposedly doesn't know why he has to die, you've got, my God, why have you forsaken me? I don't agree with that interpretation of that cry. I think he may have genuinely felt alone, but to say that he doesn't know why he has to die, we're going to find counter evidence to that here in just a moment. But the point is, if that's what that's supposed to mean, well, that's in Matthew too. It's in Matthew also. But then up here on the, in control, he's powerful, we've got uniquely in Matthew, Jesus saying that his Father could send him 12 legions of angels. We got this calm in the garden when they come to arrest him. And that's unique to Matthew. Imagine if that were in John. I mean, Ehrman picks out the fact that in John, when they come to arrest him and, they say they're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, and he says, I am he, and they all fall down. Ehrman picks that out. That's unique to John. He's like, ooh, that's fair game. That Jesus is so powerful and calm and so forth in the Gospel of John. But we also find this very calm, powerful, understanding statement in the Gospel of Matthew and nowhere else. Okay? I could get out of this if I wanted to. Notice the resemblance to no one takes my life from me, but I lay it down, found in the Good Shepherd discourse in John. But they're in different contexts. They're different statements. They're different, ways of putting this. I have no doubt that Jesus said both of these things. Okay? But notice how that counteracts the progression thesis, because Matthew is undeniably earlier than John. Okay. In John, of course, we find I'm thirsty. And that's unique to John. It's the only expression on the cross. If we're focusing on the crucifixion, it's the only expression of physical pain in the Gospels there on the crucifixion. And it's in John, supposedly this more developed gospel where Jesus' death is not agonizing to him. We'll see next time how Ehrman tries to explain that away. This whole silent throughout, he even uses the phrase, the entire proceeding. Well, you have to cherry pick that. You have to focus just on the crucifixion in Mark, because if you back up a little bit, you find in Mark 14:48, when they come to arrest him in the garden, he says, am I leading a rebellion that you are coming to me after me with, clubs and so forth? He's very strong there in the garden. And if you say, well, we're just going to focus on the crucifixion, then why are we bringing up the men falling back in the garden in John? Why are we bringing up Jesus predicting that Judas Iscariot specifically will betray him in John? You see what's going on here? We're focusing in and focusing out as that is convenient for the developmental thesis. We also find in Mark, in the Sanhedrin trial, what I mentioned in the last episode, where the high priest says, tell us whether you're the Christ, the Son of God, and he says, I am, and you will see the Son of Man, coming on the clouds and so forth. This is a very strong statement, even in the Greek of Mark. Ego eimi, I am, Mark 14:62. So, to say he's silent throughout the entire proceeding, Ehrman even says, as if in shock. And when you just look at the evidence more broadly, that's not true, okay, in Mark. That's definitely not true. Now, we find also the contrast between Luke and John. I think this is important, because the theory is that this is a developmental line that goes from Mark to John. Okay, I mean, you'll hear all over the place, John has the highest Christology and so forth. Please see my series on how Jesus sounds in John to discuss that. But here as well, where Ehrman is saying it's all part of the plan, it's all part of the plan. Okay, contrast, though, the fact that you've got these noble sayings like Jesus forgives the thief and he says, "Into your hands I commit my spirit" in Luke. And those are not repeated in John. Okay, so a lot of times this is how this will go. The critic will start with Mark and then contrast Mark to either Matthew or Luke or both and go, see, development. And then, wave hands in the direction of, yeah, and the development continues in John. Maybe bring up a couple of cherry-picked data points. Okay, but really focusing on Mark to either Matthew or Luke. But if you go over here and you contrast Luke to John, you'll sometimes find more of these supposed incidents showing, whatever the thing is supposed to be, in this case, his being noble on the cross, control, and so forth, in Luke than you find in John. So in John, we have him committing his mother to the beloved disciple while he's on the cross. You could think of that as a noble, controlled thing. Okay, but, that's the only place where he's like having conversations. And personally, I see nothing any more developed about "it is finished" than "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." I think he said both of those, and I think you just have to strain to make that a development. But then you have other conversations in Luke. He's going, forgiving the thief, telling the thief he'll be with him in paradise. He's, we even find, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do" in Luke. That is, again, something about which there is some textual question. But notice we've got one thing in Luke on the one side, Jesus suffering, about which there is some textual question, and another thing on the other side, Jesus noble and controlled in Luke, about which there is some textual question. If they're anywhere, they're in Luke. This shows this mixed, lumpy nature of the evidence. We also find that Jesus predicts his death all the way through. All the way through the Gospels, and his resurrection. So this whole thing where Ehrman is saying, it's all part of the plan in John. It's definitely all part of the plan in Mark, over and over again. Mark 8, Mark 9, Mark 10. He even predicts that he will be spit upon, held in contempt, mistreated by other people. So he foresees that. And then he will die, and then he explicitly says in Mark that he will rise again. He does this in Matthew as well, and in Luke as well, predicts his death and resurrection. Okay, but my point is, this is this commonality, that it's part of the plan. It's not a, doesn't know why he has to die in Mark. He's just in shock. He's a victim. He's taken by surprise, and then goes up to here. And then in John, it's all part of the plan. It's always all part of the plan, that he's predicting his death and his resurrection. In John, a completely different incident. John 2, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. That's not found in any of the other Gospels. But John doesn't have some of the other predictions of his death and resurrection. Those are in the synoptics. So it's almost impossible for a mainstream sort of literary critic of the Gospels to break out of this mold, this model, that somehow you've got this gradual evolutionary development of the Gospels, in this case, in Jesus' suffering, in his passion, in his control, and so forth. But the theory is all bunk. Instead, what we have are natural variations with the evidence going in all kinds of directions, both as to what's common and as to what's unique. Now, that would be expected, especially for the unique bits, if we have some degree of independence among the Gospels. So, for example, only Luke appears to have heard about Jesus being sent to Herod and mocked by Herod's war band. All right. Only John appears to either have heard of or want to include Jesus saying that he's thirsty, okay? And then we've got that commonality of some of his parallel passages throughout the synoptics of his predicting his death and resurrection. And so all of this is just way too messy and way too much like real life, coming from real people, recording real incidents, to be captured within the rigid models of the literary critics of the Gospels. That's the kind of thing we're trying to explain here at my channel. And next time I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the attempts to explain these things away or find other supposed indications of development, which are very, very dubious, very questionable, concerning Jesus being in control of his passion. So I hope you'll come back next time, because I don't want to make this particular video too long. Please come back to the Lydia Magruder channel, where we're pointing out cherry picking, pointing out theories that are bunk, and making common sense rigorous.